before Smaug's fiery wrath and the reclamation of Erebor. The lonely mountain stood as a symbol of dwarven glory, an enduring mark of craftsmanship, wealth, and unyielding pride. Erebor, the kingdom under the mountain, was a marvel of dwarven ingenuity, a city built from stone and fire, enriched with veins of precious gems and gold. Its halls gleamed with treasures accumulated over centuries of mining, trade, and meticulous craftsmanship. Erebor wasn't merely a kingdom. It was a fortress of dreams, the center of the dwarven world, a beacon of prosperity in the shadow of Middle-earth. But this was not just the story of gold and riches. Erebor's wealth is entwined with a darker tale, one that predates even the events of Thorin Oakenshield's lineage, reaching deep into the heart of Middle-earth's ancient history. The dwarves' success, their pride in the treasures of Erebor, did not go unnoticed. There was a force in the world, a force as old as time itself, that had long coveted what the dwarves had built. The dragons. The tale of Erebor is not one simply of treasure. It is a tale of greed, ambition, and the malevolent rise of creatures long thought to be legends. In the mountain's deep vaults, not only did gold shine, but darkness stirred as well. Smaug, the last of the great dragons, would not be the first to set his eyes upon Erebor's treasure, nor would he be the last to leave his mark on the kingdom. What was it about Erebor that made it so irresistible to such creatures? What decisions, once made in the light of prosperity, would eventually lead the dwarves to their ruin? This is the untold history of Erebor, the secrets buried beneath its gleaming surface, and the dragons that lay in wait. A story that reaches back to ancient times, a story of betrayal, power, and the ominous presence that would one day change the course of history. Erebor's history stretches back to ancient times, long before the events we know, when Durin the Deathless first gazed upon the lonely mountain, a place of power and promise. From the moment Durin and his people carved their homes into the stone, Erebor became a kingdom unlike any other. The dwarves had long known the secrets of the earth, how to mine the richest veins of ore, how to forge metal into something far beyond its simple, earthly form. They worked tirelessly, day after day, crafting wonders that would be prized across all the lands. Their wealth, seemingly endless, grew steadily with the mountain's riches: gold, mithril, gems, and rubies, all extracted from the mountain's very heart. The wealth that Erebor amassed was no accident. The very foundation of the kingdom was built upon an ancient power, tied to the roots of the world itself. The riches beneath Erebor's stone were not merely mineral, but enchanted. The mountain hid within it not only veins of gold, but veins of power, a force that pulsed in the earth, reaching upward through the stone and out into the world. Yet, with such wealth came pride, and with pride came The mountain, once a symbol of unity, became a fortress of greed. Whispers began to circulate. Strange rumors spread from the farthest corners of Middle-earth. Dark forces moving in the north, ancient evils stirring once more. The dwarves, with their eyes fixed firmly on their treasure, paid no heed. They could not see that the gleaming jewels and gold that filled their vaults had drawn the attention of something far older, far more dangerous than they had ever known. In the dark caverns of the world, dragons, creatures of shadow and flame, began to stir. The first whispers of their coming reached Erebor like an ill wind, but they were dismissed as nothing more than tales. The dwarves, with their minds focused on wealth and the completion of their mighty works, grew increasingly distant from the rest of Middle-earth. Their once strong alliances with the elves and men grew strained, as their desire for power and treasure grew unchecked. Distrust began to fester between them, not only with other races, but even within their own ranks. The kingdoms of the dwarves, once united by their shared toil, now began to fracture. There was too much treasure, too much power, and too many differing ambitions. The dwarven kings, long focused on their mines and their craft, began to turn inward. They grew suspicious of those outside Erebor's gates, and even of those within their halls. Their obsession with preserving their wealth blinded them to the growing darkness in the north, a darkness that would one day find its way to Erebor. While the dwarves focused on their treasures, the dragons, drawn by the shimmering gold, watched from afar. The greed of Erebor had set the stage for a greater evil to awaken, an evil far more ancient than even the dwarves had known. The first signs of Smaug's coming were nothing more than the faintest tremors in the ground, a deep, ominous rumble that reverberated through the mountain's veins. It was a sound that none could yet recognize as the herald of doom. Erebor's downfall had already begun, not through an enemy in the flesh, but through the lure of its own greed and the unspoken presence of the dragons, who would soon awaken from their long slumber to claim the riches they had long coveted. And so, the dwarves of Erebor, so proud of their mountain and their treasure, unknowingly set the stage for the arrival of the dragon that would alter their fate. The stage was set for coming storm, and Erebor, once the greatest kingdom of dwarvenkind, would soon face an adversary far beyond its comprehension, one that would burn its halls and lay waste to its riches, leaving the dwarves to reckon with the legacy of their pride. As the dwarves of Erebor dug deeper into the heart of the lonely mountain, their ever-growing treasure hoard seemed to promise an unbroken future of riches, power, and glory. The wealth that flowed from their mines was endless, their craftsmanship unmatched, and their pride swelled with each new vein of precious ore uncovered beneath the mountain stone. However, outside their carefully curated kingdom, beyond the mountains and forests that shielded their home, dark whispers began to rise from the depths of Middle-earth. creatures of legend, had long been feared, their terror the stuff of myth and forgotten stories. Yet now they were returning, driven not only by their desire for treasure, but by something darker, an ancient urge, a primal need to reclaim what had once been theirs. The dwarves, in their isolation and pride, dismissed these warnings as nothing more than old wives' tales and superstition. Their ears were deaf to the cries of the world beyond, for they were too absorbed in the wealth that filled their vaults. Erebor seemed impervious to the changing tides of Middle-earth. Its halls were shielded by its location, nestled within the cold, towering peaks of the lonely mountain. To the dwarves, it felt like the perfect refuge, a kingdom beyond the reach of time itself. Yet beneath the surface, the world was changing, and Erebor, unaware of the looming shadow, remained blissfully ignorant. The mountain itself, with all its treasures, held secrets long buried. Morgoth's dark influence still lingered, insidious in ways the dwarves could not understand. In the deepest caverns, the ancient power that had once been bound by the will of the Dark Vala stirred faintly. Within these shadows, Smaug, the great dragon, began to awaken. His senses, guided by the irresistible pull of Erebor's treasure, tracked the wealth of the mountain with an ancient hunger. The first signs of trouble were subtle, small tremors beneath the mountain that barely made the dwarves pause in their work. The weather grew erratic, storms swirling and lightning striking with unnerving regularity. Creatures that had once roamed freely through Erebor's halls, the bats and the small animals that thrived in the shadows, began to disappear. There were whispers of strange, unnatural movements in the darkness. Yet the dwarves, in their arrogance, brushed these aside as mere coincidences. How could such a thing as a dragon threaten the mighty Erebor? Surely, no beast could stand against the might of the dwarven forge. Smaug, however, was more than just a beast. He was an ancient terror, born of the very earth, and as his hunger grew, so did the signs of his approach. The fire drakes of the north, creatures of molten fury, had begun to move, their once secretive lairs disturbed. The once proud cities of the dwarves began to fall to the shadows of these ancient creatures. Erebor, too, was marked for ruin, its wealth a beacon to the fire-breathing creatures that had long since learned to hunger for the riches the dwarves had gathered. But the dwarves of Erebor paid little heed. Focused solely on their wealth, their minds consumed with treasure, they were blind to the storm gathering on the horizon. Smaug's arrival was not immediate. It was preceded by a deepening shadow, a tension in the very air. His presence had already begun to cloud the mountain, thickening the atmosphere, though the dwarves refused to acknowledge the threat. Smaug was coming, and they would soon discover that the greatest danger lay not in the enemies they could see, but in the greed they could not control. The sun, once a golden emblem of Erebor's prosperity, had already begun to fade as the dragon's shadow loomed over the mountain. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and it came with the fierce roar of a creature whose power had not been felt in centuries. The deep guttural growl echoed through the craggy stone halls, a sound so ancient and terrible that even the stoutest of hearts faltered. Smaug's presence was more than just a fiery terror, it was a revelation. The dragon was not a mere beast of fire and fury, but a force that embodied the dwarves' own unchecked ambition, their greed, and their pride. The kingdom that had once stood as a beacon of dwarven might and wealth was about to be reduced to ruin, and the dwarves, blinded by their pursuit of treasure, were caught in the flames of their own creation. As Smaug descended upon the mountain, the world seemed to tremble. His immense form filled the sky, black wings cutting through the air like a storm. His eyes, burning with fire, pierced the heart of Erebor, and his hunger became a physical force that crushed all in its path. The fire that erupted from his mouth and body was not simply destructive, it was annihilating, consuming the mountain itself. Erebor's once pristine halls, gleaming with jewels and treasure, were reduced to ash and flame. Gold melted in rivers of molten fire, and the treasures accumulated over centuries vanished into the dragon's maw. In the heart of the firestorm, the dwarves scrambled to defend their home, but it was futile. The dragon's wrath was unstoppable, and Erebor's wealth, its most prized possession, became the very thing that destroyed it. The dwarves' pride, their belief in the invulnerability of their kingdom, became their downfall. Smaug's greed was a mirror of their own. Just as the dwarves had hoarded their wealth without thought to the consequences, so too had Smaug hoarded his fury, waiting for the right moment to strike. The once great kingdom of Erebor was now a ruin, its halls filled with nothing but the smoldering remains of treasure and the sound of dragon fire. The dwarves, scattered and broken, had lost not only their home, but their very identity. Erebor was no longer the shining symbol of dwarven might. It was a hollow shell, consumed by greed and the flames of destruction. And Smaug, perched atop the mountain's peak, ruled as the undisputed king of the ruins, claiming both the mountain and its treasures as his own. But the devastation was not just physical. The emotional toll on the dwarves was far greater. They had lost more than their wealth. They had lost their purity, their honor, and the very spirit that had made them great. Smaug's fire was a reflection of their own greed, and in their attempt to hoard power and treasure, they had invited the very thing they feared most. The revelation was stark, painful, and final. The dragon had come not just to claim Erebor's wealth, but to claim its soul, as if the treasure itself had been a curse all along. Smaug had not merely destroyed a kingdom, he had revealed the truth of what lay within the dwarves' hearts. Greed, unchecked and unrestrained, had brought ruin to the very people who had once believed themselves invincible. The price of Erebor's wealth was paid in full. The collapse of Erebor had not been merely a physical destruction. It was a blow to the very soul of the dwarves. Once proud kings of a kingdom rich beyond measure, the survivors, Thorin Oakenshield and his kin, now found themselves cast out, exiles with nothing but memories of their former glory. The mountain, once their sanctuary, was now a blackened ruin, a tomb to their pride. The treasure that had defined them, that had once stood as a symbol of dwarven might, was now just a curse, a reminder of their failure. The mountain's halls were silent now, the treasure hoards emptied, and Smaug, the dragon who had claimed Erebor as his own, held dominion over what had once been the heart of dwarven power. The dwarves, forced to flee, were left broken, their sense of purpose shattered. The riches they had accumulated with such effort and care had been stolen away by the dragon, but the deeper loss was one of identity. Erebor had been a kingdom, a symbol of dwarven resilience. Now it was but a shadow of its former self, and the dwarves had no place within it. They were no longer rulers of treasure. They were wanderers, survivors who had lost their way. As the dust settled and the ruin of Erebor lay before them, the survivors were left to confront the scale of their failure. The pride and greed that had driven them to accumulate such wealth had also blinded them to the dangers lurking beyond the mountain. In their efforts to build and protect, they had neglected the world outside, and now they paid the price. Their isolation had been their undoing, and now they faced the consequences of their arrogance. The fall of Erebor sent ripples throughout Middle-earth. It was not only the dwarves who were affected. All races took note of the power that Smaug now wielded. The balance of power in the world had shifted, and with Smaug's rise, new conflicts began to brew. The once proud dwarves were scattered, their once great kingdom now a contested prize, and the presence of Smaug in the lonely mountain would forever alter the course of Middle-earth's future. As the survivors fled into exile, their hearts heavy with regret, the world around them began to change. The power vacuum left by the fall of Erebor would draw the attention of other forces, and soon the seeds of future struggles were being sown. The dwarves' downfall was not just their own. It was a turning point in the history of Middle-earth, a chapter that would lay the foundation for the struggles yet to come. The fall of Erebor was not just the loss of a kingdom. It was the beginning of a new era in Middle-earth, one that would be defined by the rise of new powers. With Smaug's occupation of Erebor, a power vacuum was created, one that would ripple across the world. The dwarves, though scattered and broken, were not forgotten. Their legacy, however tarnished, remained, and others would soon take notice. The kingdom of Erebor, once a beacon of dwarven strength, had fallen into the hands of Smaug, but the dragon's reign was not without consequences. The elves, men, and orcs alike would soon find themselves drawn into a struggle for control of the lonely mountain and its treasure. The power that Smaug now possessed was not just physical, it was symbolic, a sign of the growing darkness in Middle-earth. The rise of Smaug heralded a new chapter in the history of Middle-earth. The dwarves, once a proud and noble race, had fallen, their riches and power reduced to ash. But their downfall was not the end of the story, it was merely the beginning. Smaug's reign would eventually lead to the rise of new heroes, such as Bard the Bowman, whose actions would ignite the battle of 5 armies. But even as new heroes emerged, the shadow of Sauron, the Dark Lord, continued to grow. The events that began with the fall of Erebor would set the stage for the coming of the One Ring and the ultimate struggle between good and evil. The seeds of Sauron's power were sown in the wake of Erebor's fall, and the elves, who had once been united, found themselves divided. The dwarves, too, would never be the same. Their once unified kingdom was now in ruins, and their future in Middle-earth was uncertain. Yet, despite the fractures in their ranks, the dwarves would not fade quietly into the shadows. The echoes of Erebor's fall would reverberate for centuries to come. The fall of Erebor is a tale of tragic hubris, a story of a once proud kingdom brought to ruin by its own flaws. The dwarves' wealth, once a symbol of their might, became the instrument of their downfall. But even in the aftermath, there remained hope. The dwarves, though scattered and broken, would rise again. The story of Erebor was not just one of destruction, but of resilience. Even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of light, a flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished. The lessons learned from Erebor's fall would guide the dwarves in the ages to come. Though they had lost their kingdom, their treasure, and their place in Middle-earth, their spirit remained unbroken. The dwarves would reclaim Erebor, but their journey would be long and fraught with danger. Their triumph over Smaug would symbolize not just their resilience, but the enduring hope of Middle-earth itself. The fall of Erebor is a story of pride and fall, but it is also a story of survival. In the face of overwhelming darkness, the dwarves would rise again, carrying with them the lessons of the past and the strength to face the challenges ahead. The mountain may have fallen, but the fire of the dwarves' spirit burned brightly, and their legacy would continue to shape the world of Middle-earth for generations to come.